Law, and this is Law on a Gravel Road. Today's episode is the reality on the ground. And my guest today is Ryan Daisey. He's a rural practitioner here in Iowa, and I'll be having a conversation with Ryan today. So Ryan, thanks for agreeing to come on the podcast. And can you tell me where you're from?
No, certainly, Kathy. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being asked. I'm from a little community here in Iowa called Lake City, a really small community. I know you're familiar, not far from there yourself. No lake, of course, which I always like to be upfront with people about. You know, don't ask me if I got to go boating regularly or anything. Grew up in the small town of Lake City here in Iowa. I think it's about sitting around 1,500 as far as population now. And I always think it's interesting when anytime we're talking rural in Iowa, you know, the towns of 20,000 thinks that's small, and then your neighbor's next town over of 200, they think you're the big city. So always interesting to figure out what rural means and, you know, kind of figure out where people's roots lie.
Actually, last year was the first time we met in person, I think, last year at a meeting we had maybe at Drake Law. And when you said your name and said where you're from, I'm from as you know, I'm from Lorville, which is like 10 miles away. So we grew up and probably knew people in your family.
No, certainly. So, within minutes, it was so interesting. I know that your nephew, Ryan Cook, played on the, Iowa State University football team. And after minutes of meeting you, I was like, I think I had his jersey on my, on my wall growing up. So yeah, within minutes, it was so interesting that, we were meeting in Des Moines, but it grew up not that far from each other.
Right, had an instant connection. So, how long have you been an attorney, Ryan?
I've been an attorney for, I believe, about 3.5, 4 years now. I spent my first year out of law school clerking here in Des Moines for the Iowa Court of Appeals. So I've been in private practice about the 3 years after that.
Okay, and where did you go to law school?
The University of Iowa here in the state. Enjoyed my time there. It was during the pandemic, so I didn't get to spend as much time in Iowa City as some of my peers would have, with it kind of being closed down for a good stint there. But great school. Was happy to attend.
That's great. So, I think you told me that you always knew you wanted to do rural practice. So, what did you do for your internships while you were at Iowa?
So, with the world kind of being shut down, so just kind of as a timeline, my first year at Iowa, I entered in 2019, and of course, the pandemic came in 2020. So my second semester of law school, I think we can all remember back to that time. There was kind of, things were up in the air. No one was really knowing what was going to happen. I actually got in contact with court administration in my, home district, and just sought out an opportunity to work with some judges there. I worked with 2 judges on the district court for that summer, and it was just an amazing experience, not only because I got that early exposure into the court system, but having to intern with the district court, I got to meet so many attorneys that summer. It's one of those things where I just began to make connections really early on, and that really was, to this day, those connections exist, and I just was so fortunate to get started on those things really early in my career.
Did you do that in Calhoun County or?
Yes, I did that in Calhoun County, and also with the judges I was working for that summer, we also kind of explored over into Sac County as well. So it was kind of following my judge that summer, and again, that just meant more counties, more exposure to attorneys in those rural places.
Then what did you do after your second law school year? So
after my second law school year, I actually was put in contact with Frank Pekacek, who's the managing partner at my law firm now. The dean of the law school at the time, Dean Washburn, he had a relationship with Frank Pekacek, and he knew I was kind of interested in a rural practice. He knew I started an organization at Iowa Law for a rural practice.
Oh, wow.
And he said, I got the guy you got to talk to. So he got me in touch with Frank because the law firm had 6 rural locations. It's based out of Council Bluffs, but we have 6 rural communities in which we service every single week. And he said, Ryan, if you want to go rural, this is the guy you got to talk to. So I went out to Council Bluffs my second summer and got to just kind of tour the western side of Iowa and all rural locations.
And I'm glad to hear Dean Washburn listen to that you wanted to go to rural practice. I think you've told me in the past that there were some people that tried to steer you to go to bigger cities. Was that the case?
Certainly. I think that, with the law school rankings and, kind of the goals of, the prestige that comes with various schools, everyone's pushing to have their students go to the biggest firms and the biggest cities with the highest salaries. And there was a little pressure I felt in law school, both from, peers as well as some people in the staff. But generally, overall, there were just some individuals who were really really looking out for me, and Dean Washburn was definitely one of those. I mean, right from the, he was the top of the law school, and he was saying, Ryan, I heard rural, here you go. So I definitely did receive some push in a certain direction when I was in law school. I had some professors tell me, I'd be a fool to enter a smaller practice when I had some of these big law opportunities, but it certainly wasn't a blanket statement for the whole law school. There were really great people like Dean Washburn, Melissa Norman, who really were really supportive. Dean Crane's another one, who really was looking out for kind of my interest and what I wanted. And there were many more, but again, it wasn't a blanket thing at the law school, but there was some pressure to, pursue a larger practice, in part because of the prestige that would come with that.
Yeah, so I got some of that pressure too when I was in law school, but overall, I went to Drake and I had the same experience where the professors really wanted you to do what you were meant to do and what you had a passion for, so that's great. So how does it work that you're practicing in multiple small towns? So it sounds like you go all over to the different offices throughout the week?
Certainly, we do a lot of traveling. It's one of those things where even though our hub is Council Bluffs, I would say a majority of our clientele are from rural communities on the western side of the state. We have a rural office as north as Carroll and as south as Clarinda, so we cover a large part of that portion of the state, and I would say that's where probably 80 to 90% of our clients are. Each of us always are at least in one of the rural offices at least once a week, but oftentimes are there more by appointment or by need. So my office is in Carroll, Iowa, which is not that far from Lake City where I grew up. So I have a lot of connections in that community, a lot of clients that are really close in proximity, and we travel to the offices that aren't the one we regularly staff by need. It was an area of expertise that I'm in, and someone in the Ottawa office needs that expertise. We travel there, we meet with those people. So it's one of those things where we aren't in the traditional sense always in our rural office, but we staff it regularly, and we always are willing to meet with clients in those areas.
How do clients perceive that if the law office isn't open every day? Are they open to that, or how does that work out?
I think generally they're open, in part because our law firm has been there for so long. We've had offices in these locations right now for, in some situations, over 30 years. They know that we're in town these days. They know they can contact us at any time. They know that we'll make ourselves available to them. I think what you're really touching on there is, if you're not there all the time, kind of a distrust that could come from a rural place. I think over the years we've built that rapport. And I also will say, with a lot of the attorneys in our office being from rural locations, and oftentimes the one we go back to practice in, I think that's really helpful. When I meet with a new client in my Carroll office, for example, I will, from the start, tell them a little bit about myself. Hey, I grew, how many miles from here in Lake City, and immediately it's like a connection, kind of like when we first met. You kind of build that rapport with people because you probably know someone that they know. And again, to especially people in rural areas, where the interconnectedness is so important, kind of having that immediate connection kind of builds that trust from the start. So I think that's really kind of the key, is letting the people know, hey, I'm a rural person too, and I'm going to be able to help you, even if I am here just a few times a week.
Now, I think you mentioned that your law firm has done this for a long time, had different satellite offices around. Do you know what made them start to do that?
I don't have the full history book, but I think one of the biggest things were rural practitioners closing up shop. I think it's one of those things where my office sort of saw a need in some of these rural areas. I think that even though we find ourselves in dire need of rural attorneys now, I think the process and what started moving everyone in that direction actually started a long time ago. And I think our office has been contacted by people who were closing their firms, looking for successors, people who didn't have successors, who needed someone under the ethical rules. So I really think that's kind of how we got started. And once people found out that's something our firm does, and I think especially does that successfully, and is also willing to take care of their clients, even though we aren't there all week long, I think it lended some rural practitioners to kind of seek us out and put us in that position, because I've always found, especially when I talk to older practitioners, they've been helping these people for sometimes 50, 60 years on the long end. They want to make sure that they're not just walking away from their job, but that the people they've been caring for, are going to continue to be cared for. So I think that's kind of something that, once we had a reputation for being able to do that, different law firms sought us out.
That's got to be very important because, we did the rural roundtables last fall where the Bar Association, we went around to different rural communities. And lots of times we were talking to 70 or 80-year-old attorneys that were still practicing, and some of them full-time practicing, and they would really wanted to retire, but they loved their clients, and they didn't want to leave their clients just with nobody. And so I think you're providing a valuable service to those clients when they know you're going to come in and treat them well, and you understand real practice too.
No, certainly. I've heard that same thing speaking with older practitioners. If they could just find someone who'd be willing to care for their folk, I think they would, retire in a heartbeat. So,
what do you think the barrier is? So these attorneys in real practice that are in their 70s and 80s, what do you think the real barrier is for them finding someone? There's a lack of law students for one thing, or new attorneys, but do you think there's other barriers that why they can't find somebody to take over, or?
So I think there's the general aspect that, it's not just a trend in our profession, but everywhere. People aren't going back to rural places. There's a big migration from smaller communities to larger ones. I think beyond that, maybe some barriers that rural practitioners are putting on themselves, especially as someone who just entered the profession, is a lot of smaller offices, for various good reasons that I understand, can't always hire first-year summer students. So those students go off somewhere else, even if they'd be interested in rural practice, and they've kind of found their path to their employment. So I think that's one barrier. Another barrier, I think, is that they want to sell their practice. And we have students graduating law school between undergrad and law school debt, oftentimes in excess of $100,000. I'm sure we've all in this profession have found peers who are in excess of $200,000. So they're trying to figure out how they're going to manage their law school debt, probably a mortgage, and then also be, having a small business loan on, buying someone's practice. So I see that as another barrier too, of trying to get people into a rural practice on the practitioner side, that is, as totally, not even considering all the limitations and restrictions on getting students into those areas.
I think that is a lot to do with it. The Bar Association gets a lot of people calling, asking for help to sell their practice, and lots of times they're disappointed when we say it isn't worth, your practice isn't probably worth a lot. You don't have a lot of goodwill once you're gone from there. I think one of the things that we can do is try to get practitioners to think about when they want to retire earlier, so they have time to bring somebody in. I see a lot of people that are waiting until a year before they want to retire, and then it's too late to bring somebody, or kind of late to bring somebody in to take over your practice, get a relationship with your clients so they can continue that practice. So I think that's part of it. I think we need to start earlier.
Certainly, and I think, when you start earlier too, not only does that benefit the practitioner, because maybe 5 years into it, there is some goodwill there, and there might be some finances there, but also that allows, the young lawyer coming in to be mentored for those 5 years, not only to build that rapport, but, they're going to have something they kind of paid for those years. They're going to be compensated for being a young attorney, but they're not just receiving that compensation, but that rural attorney's expertise over that 5 years. And I think that it's kind of one of those things where, they get that mentorship, and then maybe there's an avenue where 5 years, 6 years down the road, that attorney can be paid off.
Another thing that we heard in our roundtables was some attorneys, they'd like to hire a younger attorney or a new attorney, but they maybe have never hired an attorney before, and they're really hesitant about how are they going to know how to train a young person, or anyone for that matter. And they don't necessarily think they have the skills to do that, and I think that's a concern. Have you heard that?
No, I certainly have, and I think that that's one of the things especially when we're in the law schools talking to students, it's, as a rural practitioner, you wear so many hats. Not saying that people in larger firms don't do that, but oftentimes that there are people for various jobs where if you're a solo practitioner or you're managing a small firm, you are the everything. And I think to these rural practitioners, they're saying, I'm already the everything, and now I got to be the hiring person and the training person. And I do think that's a common barrier. And I've been, and frequently asked, things that the bar can do. And I think that if we could somehow, set up some, I don't know if it'd be curriculum or what it would be, or just kind of like a guidebook on, all right, these are, kind of the steps in accepting a new attorney, the things that, you should be advising them on. Because I get that fear. I've never had a training one myself. If you told me that tomorrow I had to do that, it'd be daunting to anyone. And I think especially to rural practitioners who are trying to manage their own practice, keep that up and running, and be a small business owner, it's just another hat they have to wear that maybe they aren't ready for.
Yeah, and they're thinking about it when they're older too, so that's just another barrier too, I think. Because a lot of the attorneys they might be training are younger, that might make them hesitant, and just maybe they're not in that place in their life to have the energy and the drive to want to train someone too. So I think that's something that where the bar can probably help, and we're working on some things in that regard. What do you think people misunderstand about rural practice?
I think one of the biggest misunderstandings, and of course, it's one of those things where, of course, you and I, Kathy, growing up in rural areas, we know what rural practice is. If we're talking about misunderstandings of, people who are in law school or perhaps in large communities, I think one of the biggest misunderstanding is that a rural practice is always a general practice or is always a simple practice, where that's not the case. It can be complex. You can, kind of morph it how you want it. I think, and I always think about this because it's funny to me, but I think that in the same way, like it's a good image in my mind, it'll be a good image for you, is someone once told me, isn't rural practice dusty? And I know what they mean. Like I envision this, a county seat practice, and you open the door and it's a little dark in there and there's just all this dust on these old law books, right? And I think that's an image that's in people's mind. Whether it's, from media, I think that's a big one. There's plenty of, film adaptations that show the rural lawyer, you know what I mean? And they have this concept that it's a dusty practice, when really it can be vibrant, you can specialize. Another misconception is that you're not gonna make any money. I think that is a big one, and I know, through the, Rural Showcase that we're doing in the Iowa Lawyer, that's something we're trying to show people, is this is not, just a low-paying occupation because of where you're at. There's real financial opportunity there as well. So I think that it can be complex, that it can be, dynamic, that it can be broad, are really just some big misunderstandings there. It can be what you want to make it, and I think that's one of the beauties of it.
I think so too. I think an attorney, even in a larger law firm like I am, you still kind of set your own destiny. And that's no different than real practice. It's based on how hard you want to work, how you want to market, and what you want. Maybe you don't want to work 80 hours a week. Maybe you want a different balance. But those are all possible with real practice, just like they are in anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the word that needs to be spread, is in the same way that you could do that, you also could have done that if you wanted to go back to, somewhere a little bit closer to Cheyenne. So,
yeah. So we've talked a lot, and you and I have talked a lot about in the Bar House about legal deserts. Right now we have about 43 counties in Iowa that qualify as legal deserts. And just for our audience, I'm going to explain how we define a legal desert. So what we use is the ABA definition of a legal desert is a county that has fewer than one attorney per 1,000 citizens. And so right now we have 43 counties. How close do you think some of these counties are to having no legal access? So
looking at the numbers on some of the calculations the bar has done, in some instances I think we're 10 to 100 people to that county also becoming the 44th legal desert in Iowa.
And we have some rural counties that only have 1 or 2 licensed attorneys. And I think it's misleading too. Some counties may have 9 or 10, but some of those attorneys may be retired and not actively practicing, or they might be the county attorney, might be working for a company, and so they aren't available like for private citizens for private practice. So some of those licensing numbers I think are misleading too, to show the actual dire need that we have for attorneys. What's the most concerning trend you see right now, being in rural Iowa and a rural practitioner?
I think one of the most concerning trends is, I think you said it earlier, we don't have as many law students coming out, and those law students that are coming out aren't picking rural practice. And, again, with anything that I say today, it's one of those things where I want everyone to go down their path. I want, if what they want in life is to live in a big city, they love the skyscrapers, I want that for that person. I just don't want someone who maybe that isn't their choice to be deterred from rural practice because they think everyone's supposed to go do that.
Right.
So I think this kind of goes back to the perceptions of rural practice. This goes back to the perceptions within the microcosm of law schools, is that rural is somehow like not as good, or like a lesser practice. And I think that mentality is a scary trend. I think, per you saying that you went through some of the same experiences I did, a trend that's been going on for some time. And I think that trend is causing people to not enter rural practice, and this is a common thing I hear all the time from students who are going and have spoke with me previously. They're saying, I'm going to go to this big practice for a couple years, and then in a couple years I'm going to come rural. And I haven't seen that yet. The second part of that, I hope they're finding happiness wherever they want. I hope if they want to end up back in a rural place, that's what they're going to end up in. But again, I see the trend being, I think some of those students are feeling that pressure, and I think that's the scary trend, is that they're being kind of pushed into somewhere maybe that's not best for them, and that's kind of away from rural practice, in my opinion.
I think part of the problem too is the students that say they're going to go somewhere else is I think they can make a lot more money and pay off their student loans. I think some people have a real misperception about what some of the starting salaries are in rural Iowa. It's not going to be like if you went to Chicago or somewhere, but I recently heard that a lot of the law firms in rural Iowa are starting at $70,000. A lot of them are. And that's comparable to what some firms do in Des Moines. But I don't think people realize that the salaries are fairly comparable, especially you might have lower living expenses and housing too. Some expenses are not going to be lower.
Mm-hmm.
You pay the same for gas and groceries and those type of things. But I think people don't understand the money that they can even make initially in rural Iowa.
No,
Do you find that?
Certainly, and I think like you said, they're looking at the biggest firms and not more of a standard firm in these areas. And I think what a big barrier there is rural law firms don't necessarily post their starting salaries like other firms do. Kind of like we were saying is, some of these rural firms, they're looking for an attorney every 15 years, whereas a lot of the, maybe some of the Des Moines firms here, they're hiring someone every year, that information is more available. So I think it's all about, maybe a little bit more transparency. And, if there was more of that transparency, and then, all of a sudden there's a $5,000 to $10,000 difference between my job offer in Des Moines versus what I could go maybe back home for. And I think if they were aware those numbers are a little closer than they thought, it could definitely be a factor.
I think so too. I think that would help. So what do you think the impact of technology is going to have on rural law? Is that going to help or hurt the crisis, or what's your opinion?
So, I'm kind of optimistic about it personally. I think in part because I think it's going to be more permissive for attorneys to get more things accomplished in the day due to travel. I think it'd be very similar to where, even though there's certainly downsides of not all the attorneys having to are getting to meet in the courthouse on hearing day and getting to build relationships. I've heard a lot, especially from court-appointed attorneys, about how much time they save being able to do their hearings remotely, whether it be over phone, over Zoom. So I think as the court continues to go in that direction, I think those things are going to be positive for rural attorneys, because they're going to be able to be in multiple counties in one day just over the phone or over Zoom. And of course, I'm sure that question is kind of leading into the AI future, right? It is worrisome, right? At the same time, I think that everyone's talking about, the negatives that could bring upon it, but I look at some of the positives for a rural attorney, just being more efficient. The idea is some of these rural firms where you need multiple legal assistants, and sometimes they can be very hard to find. You need to have a large support staff to get these things done. Perhaps like AI in the future is going to make the rural solo shop at least at some level more economical. Maybe it could take care of some overhead. So again, I can see some of the concerns. I can see some of the fears. I think it's something that we need to continue to monitor. But I'm looking at the positives that I could see coming. That is potentially some lower overhead costs, and the ability to have a very wide practice. We have a gentleman on the rural practice section, Philip DeCoster, and he does reproductive law. And he does reproductive law all over the place, from a rural community here in Iowa. I'm trying to think of the population of whole Iowa right now, but it's not a large place.
Probably 500 or 1,000, not even that. Probably.
Yes, and he gets to be in this specialized area of law, but also get to be a rural attorney. Anytime he comes and we go to law schools together, he always tells the students his commute is 2 minutes to work, and that's on a bike. And he talks about how he gets to live this lifestyle, but also has a very specialized practice. And I think that 50 years ago, he would be able to do that. But with even the technology that we have today, he's able to have this very broad and specialized practice. He does some general things on the side, but he's able to have this little area in which he's really passionate about and really, studied up on that he can do because of the technology. So I guess I'm hoping that even if there may be some negatives that come with the future technology, that we can use it as rural practitioners to continue to make our lives easier and show more people that it's really something you can make in a small town. You can make it.
I think that's great, because I know he does work with people all over the country, maybe even all over the world, I don't know. But that makes it possible for him to do that. And you mentioned also that it's hard to find competent legal staff sometimes in smaller towns. So hopefully it'll help address that issue too, so they can have better legal services. So another thing that you do is you're chair of the rural practice section. And we used to be the Rural Practice Committee. Can you tell me about what you do on that committee?
Certainly.
Section.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes. No, and it's...
I keep saying committee.
It's so young. Everyone's doing it. We were the Rural Practice Committee for, I think, in excess of 15 years. And it was something where just last year, big shout out to AJ Skogerson. She really had this great idea of, one of the biggest things we're trying to do is connect the rural attorneys. And what we did is we came to the Board of Governors and we said, one of the best things about being a section are these listservs. I'm on multiple listservs for the bar. I'm sure many people listening to this podcast, I'm sure you are, Kathy, and there's just so much good information. There's so many attorneys helping attorneys in those listservs. And we thought if we could just have that listserv and expand kind of our reach, that we could make, the information that we have in kind of our network of rural attorneys just even wider. So the Board of Governors graciously granted us that section status. We have that listserv, and the best thing they probably did, or something we're really grateful for, is they made it a free to join section. So that means that, even though kind of the section fees are nominal, there's no fee for the rural practice section. So you can join the listserv, you can join our section, and just be a part of it from the start. So that really is the big transition from being the Rural Practice Committee to being the Rural Practice Section. And this being our first year here, we've put our section council together. We got our feet under us. We continue to keep some of those same missions that the committee had, which is going to the law schools. We go to Drake, Iowa, Creighton every year, and recently we added University of South Dakota.
That's exciting to have added that.
Certainly. And we just found there were so many students coming from the University of South Dakota to Iowa. So it's like, that's kind of our target audience, just as much as Drake, Creighton, or Iowa would be. So we expanded that. We're visiting them. Excitingly, we're excited for the annual meeting, as everyone should be. We're a part of our own rural practice track that day with the egg law section and I believe the solo small. Yeah. Yep. The section. So we have a couple of CLEs. Of course, we have you featured, Kathy, and I'm excited for that because, I think a lot of people have seen great things from your roundtable report, of you and Harry traveling across the state. But I'm excited to kind of sit you down and hear a lot more about like the emotional side of it. It's not just statistics in these small towns. Anyone can look at the map of the legal deserts. But I'm excited to kind of hear your take on the personal side of the people you got to interact with, some of their deep concerns, some of their feelings, some of the things that you can't just easily, put in a, brief report. So we're featuring you, of course, and then our other talk that day is going to be about making court-appointed work more efficient. We're going to have district court judges, magistrate judges, rural practitioners who take court appointments, and we're going to have a panel of them, and it's going to be focusing on, we live in a world right now where, the pay for indigent defense is, of course, lower than many of us would like, and, in that world, we still have to navigate it. So how can we make our time and what we're doing with those indigent defense hours just more efficient so that, we can encourage people to pursue those court appointments, but also to help those that do take them, be able to, do it adequately, efficiently, and maybe able to take on more.
And you're right, that's a great point to bring up. Lots of rural attorneys do court-appointed work, which is indigent defense work for criminals and juveniles, or people accused of crimes, and juveniles, because in a lot of cases, if you have juveniles, and a separate attorney has to be appointed for the mom, the dad, maybe grandparents and the juveniles. So it takes a lot of attorneys. And lots of rural attorneys do that kind of work. So it's great that you're talking to try to help them be more efficient in doing that so they can do that because they provide a great service. What else is your section working on?
We're working on continuing to connect rural attorneys to students. And really what we've kind of changed in the last year is the Rural Practice Committee for the longest time was focused on law students and connecting them with rural practitioners. We've tried to expand that in two ways. One way we're doing it is we're not just talking to law students anymore. We're going to high schools. We're going to talk with colleges. The idea is we get with those career fairs. We talk to the students when they're really young and kind of plant that seed. And I think one of the best things to say is, hey, you can do this here. I was talking with, John just earlier this afternoon, and, his program through mock trial. We encourage people on the rural practice section, go judge mock trial. We get to help out with the Bar Association, and then you kind of put that plug in. Hey, if you like what you're doing, student, you can do this in your community. You can come back right here and you can do exactly what you're, pretending or learning about right now. So that's a big push. And the other thing we're doing is not only focusing on students, but we're focusing on lawyers further in their career. We got this campaign out that's, it's all about, small town, big life. The idea is maybe if you are in a larger community right now and you want to go try maybe a slower life. One of the things I think about all the time is when I grew up, I'd always see those Hallmark movies on the TV. And, there's this very idealist life in these rural communities, but it's slow. Everyone's interconnected. And the idea is, I think what we're really trying to promote is if the big law practice in the big city isn't for you, hey, you could do that same work in more of a Hallmark setting in a rural community. So that's something our section's doing, is really expanding kind of our target audiences, and then really just trying to weave a larger network of students or of practitioners that we can connect with.
That's a great avenue to go down, because we've heard more in the last year or two of some attorneys that have practiced in larger places, even in Des Moines, that have started their own solo practices or have done things like that. So, and then you're talking about experienced attorneys going to rural Iowa too, that that a new attorney isn't experienced yet. So I think that's a great avenue that we should be pursuing too. So Harry, who's our executive director at the bar, is working on a new website. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So first of all, it's amazing. It looks great. It looks great. Kathy and Harry found an example out of New York State. Like I said, it should be unraveled or revealed soon. And it is a breakdown, and I think this is the best thing, is it's very easy to access. It'll be easy to access for students. It'll be easy access for maybe older practitioners that aren't necessarily technologically tech savvy there. And it's a map of the state of Iowa, and it's a breakdown of counties. And you can go. It's very simple. You click on the county, and when you click on the county, you're going to see that county's ambassador, which is someone we're going to look for in each of the counties, who's going to be kind of the welcoming committee for making those connections between people. And I have such high confidence that it's going to be easy to find those people, because there are people in these communities who want to see their communities thrive. Yeah. So you click in there, you're not only going to see that ambassador, but you're going to see a breakdown of the population of that county by the communities in that county, as well as some basic information about that county, and then you're going to see the job postings in that county. And the idea is it's going to be a service in which it's going to cross with the bar's employment posting. So we're going to have posts coming into the bar, they're going to be posted there, and students can access it, as well as it's going to be really easy for employers to post it. And I think that's really one of the best things about it, not only the ease of access of it, but something I hear from rural practitioners all the time is the time investment in attempting to go out and find a new hire, and about how they can't always send someone to one of the law schools for on-campus interviews for a whole day, just because they're losing a day or two from their practice time. So I think this idea is, if that's something where they can make this job posting, and someone looking in that geographical area can click on that job posting and then just immediately be connected with that person, I think it is just going to do wonders for rural practice here in Iowa.
I think another feature we're talking about doing too is not just job opportunities, but other opportunities. If somebody wants to sell their law firm, or say a bank has an open office that they'd be willing to lease to a young attorney, or if there's opportunities like that in the communities too, I think are going to be posted. So I think it's going to be a really good resource for anybody looking at rural practice.
And that's going to be amazing, because how else would someone find something like that out? So I just think it's going to, again, I'm just so excited to be a part of the bar during this era, and I just can't wait to look back 10 years from now and just kind of see what all these things became.
The annual meeting, you mentioned that the real estate section is going to have its own track So their own morning of CLE, which is continuing legal education for attorneys. Talk a little bit about what we've been talking about on the Thursday, which is June 26th of the annual meeting. We're going to have a morning that's a rural practice roundtable. Talk a little bit about that.
So, I don't have, the entire list of everything we're doing that day, but I think, we're bringing in the professor that wrote the book.
Yeah.
That is, I think, kind of the keynote of the time. It's one of those things where I know that you've worked with her. I know Dr. Farrell at the University of Iowa has been close with her. So it's going to be exciting to kind of have, her expertise coming in there because I know she's put a lot of the statistical work into all of these things. So excited for that, excited for the panel. And I think above all, what I'm excited for, again, I wish I could, express or, be looking out for, the posting when it comes, folks. But what I'm excited for is just that it's the focus. I think that I've heard this from rural practitioners, even before the roundtable was about you, Kathy, is they were concerned about this. And it wasn't always something that they didn't feel like their concerns were being heard about some of the stuff and some of the worries in rural Iowa. And you've really made it important. You made it important to you, and you're making something important at the annual meeting. And I think, I can't tell you, it's in excess of 20 people who've told me just how heard they are about it. And just how they've been trying to express this for so long, and just knowing that it's not only been a focus of your presidency, but that coming to this annual meeting, there's going to be a whole period, a whole day devoted to that. It's just going to be, again, it's going to be amazing for rural practice, and it has done so much for rural practitioners who just wanted to make sure that they were, being heard with their concerns.
That's great to hear, because our rural practitioners, I'm from rural Iowa, you're from rural Iowa. We know what that means to a community to have an attorney and to have those services. And we value those people just like we do all our attorneys. But, when we're centered in Des Moines, sometimes it's easy to think that, that our focus is Des Moines, which it really isn't. But I'm glad they're getting that message. So what's the best part of practicing in a small town?
I think it's the people. I think that, law students have asked me this before, why would I go here versus somewhere else? And I really think it is the people. I get to work with people every single day. Even if, I'm helping them with their LLC or their corporation, and that has its own name, I know, Joan and Mike who are behind it. And I get to hear about their family. I get to hear about their life. I get to know them personally. And I think not only knowing the people and getting to work for the people, but getting to see them thrive. The idea is I grew up hauling garbage. And one of my favorite things about hauling garbage is I could get in the garbage truck that day with my uncle, and rain or shine, we'd be out there hauling garbage, but the garbage would be out there, I could pick up the garbage, and then there was no more garbage. I did my job. I got to see what I accomplished that day. No more garbage. And then we take all the garbage and we're done for the day, and we did something. And I got to see those results. We could drive back through town and I see all the empty cans and just know, hey, I accomplished something. I think when I get these people into my office and then I get to see their business thrive, or I get to work on their estate planning, and then I get to see their estate plan be successful and their children thrive. And I not only get to know them, but then know their children and see them in the community, and just know that I got to be a part of and kind of see the results of what I'm doing. And again, I've never been, a big, huge, law firm attorney, but I just imagine if I was doing a small piece for a multinational company, even though I know that's incredibly impactful, I know that's incredibly necessary, I know we need those people, and I bet you can have a huge passion in that. For me, it's seeing my individual impact on the individual people that I get to work for every day.
That's one of my favorite things to do is I do lots of farm real estate, and I love working with rural farmers. Because that's my people. Mm-hmm. And I'm more comfortable around them, and it's just, we speak the same language, and it's just, they're so grateful for your help and appreciate it. And like you say, you get to know them and you get to know their families over time, and it's much more personal, I think.
I like what you just said. That's my people.
Yeah.
And I think that no matter where you are in your legal career, or if you're in law school and you're thinking about a rural practice or a different type of practice, go where your people are. For you, that might be Chicago and in a skyscraper. For some people, that's going to be, on the coast. But there's some people, and there's probably going to be some people listening to this, that their people are, in rural Iowa. And I hope that they, kind of have a sightseeing journey inside of themselves to find what you just said. their people. So I don't know, that just kind of touched me when you said that, because I know exactly what you mean when you said, these are my people.
You know, and it took me a while to realize that when I was in high school. I graduated in 1980, which shows how old I am. But, you know, in some ways I couldn't wait to get away from that. But the more I thought about it, in a couple of years I was back home, married and back home, but it's just like there's nothing like being in a place you feel like you're home. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's great that we're working on Real Practice and try to give that opportunity to more people. And you know, you can acclimate to a small community too and become a part of that community and be important and part of that. And not every place you can do that.
Certainly, and those people want you there. You know, anytime I talk to people and they're looking for somewhere new to put their roots down, like if you come in, you're helpful, you're going to respect the people in this community. As an attorney, they're going to welcome you. The people will immediately be trying to get you on certain boards. They're going to be. I just think that. I've even talked to people not from rural areas who have gone to rural areas, and one of the first things they tell me is how they were just immediately embraced, and I think that's just true, of these rural places.
I think so too. I think attorneys are valued there, and I think just their communities are welcoming, the schools are welcoming, and I think you can have a great experience. So, how can people get more involved if they want to? If they decide this is something they'd like to become involved in, our Rural Practice movement?
Oh, certainly, the movement. That's a good word for it. We're going to look back, and this will be the era of the movement, Kathy. I think the last time I got this question was at a YLD, a Young Lawyers Division event, and it was the current president of the YLD, Manuel, and he asked me the same thing. He's like, Ryan, I'm not from a rural area. I don't really know a lot about rural practice, but I'm completely on board. Like, what do we got to do? What does someone like me got to do? And I think I told him, and not only did I tell him that day, but I've seen him implement this, which has been amazing. And that is just tell people about it. Let people know about that option. I think my little sister, she teaches kindergarten in a rural community. And if I go to her like kindergarten class and I had a little microphone, it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would hear, I want to be a teacher, or I want to be a preacher, or I want to be a doctor or a lawyer. I'm not going to hear that I want to be a shoe cobbler or a lapidary. Kindergartners don't know these are options that are available to them. I think it's kind of like that way with rural practice. I think people who want to join the movement, if they aren't rural practitioners themselves, it's just letting law students, letting other people know that it's an option. Let them know that, like those jobs, kindergartners don't think about that here's a job and here are the perks about that job, and just letting people know that that's an option you can have and see if that's right for you. And I think that as long as we keep doing that with things like what you're doing with this podcast, Kathy, or in the law schools or at bar events, and just letting people know it's an option, it's just going to be something that's at least going to be considered by them on their minds. Just like if I went to my sister's kindergarten classroom and started talking about, an obscure job. If you don't know about something and you don't know about the viability of that option, you don't really consider it. So if someone wants to join the movement, I think it's all about, just promoting it, even if you're not familiar with it, because just having that idea out there and letting someone know that it can be a route is going to do tons.
Yeah, I agree, Ryan, and I really appreciate your passion for this. The first time I met you, that's the first thing I saw is how passionate you are about this. And I know we have a connection just because we're kind of from the same area, but appreciate all you do for the real estate section and all you're doing for Rural Practice, and hope we have a lot more years to continue to work together. So thank you for being my guest today.
No, thank you so much, Kathy, and thanks for what you've done for Rural Practice this year. It's been a lot.
Thank you.